Good afternoon, folks, and welcome to the Pervasive Media Studio Lunchtime Talk. So these talks are live every Friday at 1 p.m, both here in the building and live online. So whether you're in Bristol or you're far away, you can join in the conversation. So my name is Martin O'Leary. I'm the studio community lead here at the Pervasive Media Studio. I'm a white man in my 40s with long hair and a beard and a flowy purple t-shirt today because it's very hot. And I apologize to the folks in the room. Our air conditioning is broken on this side of the studio. If you would like to sit in the cool for a bit, you can go over to the other side of the studio where the air conditioning is working. All right. So every Friday, we throw open the doors of the Pervasive Media Studio for Open Studio Friday, where we offer you the chance to spend some time in our space and hot desk alongside our residents and staff from 10 a.m. to 5 p.m. Especially big welcome to anyone who's new to the space. Can anyone who's new to the space put your hand up? Got a few? Oh, yeah, quite a few today. So welcome. This bit is for you. What is the Pervasive Media Studio? We're a diverse and collaborative community exploring creativity and technology, everything from comedy to coding and product development to performance art. We're a partnership between Watershed, where we are right now, the UE Bristol and the University of Bristol, and we're funded by Arts Council England. And what we do is we offer a studio space, desks, meeting rooms, events and opportunities, all for free to our residents as part of a spirit of generosity and mutual exchange. And we're a space for people to take risks with embryonic ideas and to make some time for collaboration. So a few notes before we begin. As I said, it is quite warm today. If you do need to hop over, take a break, please do. The kitchen back there has water and glasses and things. If you want to grab a glass of water, make a cup of tea or anything, you're welcome to do that. We also have a quiet space just next to this space, to my left, to your right. So just around the corner there through the door. That space also has an air conditioning unit in it, which is working. So if you need to pop in there, please do. And there are fire exits at either end of the studio. So if you hear a fire alarm, we're not planning a drill or anything, so it's probably real. Studio team will direct you towards the fire exits, but in any event, they are at the other side of the studio with the working air conditioning. My left to your right, right down there, either end, big green signs, you can't miss them. But in any event, we'll show you where to go. And lastly, there are some accessible toilets, including baby change, over in the corridor next to the kitchen. There will be a Q&A at the end of this talk. So for those of you who are watching online, please pop your questions into the YouTube chat. Lautem is here. He will be your voice in the room today. If you're in the building, please put your hand up. We'll send a microphone around so the folks at home can hear what you're saying. Do it the old-fashioned way. You can get news on all of our future talks by going to watershed.co.uk/studio, at PM Studio UK on Twitter, at Pervasive Media Studio at mastodon.social on Mastodon, or at Pervasive Media Studio on Instagram. I should say that this is the second last talk of the summer. We are taking a break for August, so please come along next week, and then don't come along the week after, because there won't be a talk to see. Or do, you know, it's fine. Anyway, our speaker for today is Jake Gaule. Jake is a composer, sound designer, and studio resident. Jake has a background in sound design and editing for TV before moving into working in video games, audio drama, and interactive experiences. Today he's going to give a whistle-stop tour of how sounds get into video games and try to demystify some of the technical aspects of the process. So please join me in giving a very warm welcome to Jake.
Oh, thanks, Martin. Thanks, Lautem, for dealing with me faffing around about dates and stuff. Hi, everyone. I'm Jake. Nice to meet you all. So I'm going to kind of try and give a quick whistle-stop tour of 4 real examples of putting sounds into games and how that works. There's going to be some techie terms and things, and I will really do my best to explain what all of them mean, but please put your hand up at any point and interrupt me. Or if you're a programmer in the room, put your hand up and say, that's not how that works, that doesn't make sense. I will be... Do that at the end if you want, that's fine. And yeah, so I'm just going to, basically, I've got quite a lot to get through. It's probably going to take about 40 minutes, and then obviously there's time for questions at the end. And also I just want to say that there's no none of these are the right way to do anything. There's no one right way as far as I'm concerned anyway. So some of them are super janky, some of them are not, but they all worked, and they're all in real games that went out into the world. So yeah. Who am I? What am I doing with my life? Be a relatable question. So I did a music degree a long time ago, and I did a bunch of other jobs that had nothing to do with music. And then I went back to university because I wanted to do something with my degree. and I worked in TV post-production for a year, so did a lot of editing, sort of what's called Foley, which is can be anything from like all of the sounds you hear in nature documentaries, was a lot of what I did, so like working on things like, I just realized I didn't start my timer, sorry. Working on things like the sound of crabs walking around on the bottom of the ocean and all of that kind of stuff, to like things like footsteps, doors, all of the kind of more, boring is the wrong word, but more sort of normal, I guess, sound effects in films. So I did that for a year. I didn't particularly enjoy working there, so I left, and I wanted to work in games, and very slowly I managed to do that, and now that's what I do. So these are the 4 examples, and I'll try and explain a little bit of the terminology on this slide as well. So yeah, so we're going to show 2 examples of sound design and then 2 examples of music. The first example is going to be how to play back footsteps. This is just one method. There are a whole bunch of methods for doing this, but this is, I'll explain sort of why I chose this method and like what the advantages of it are. We're going to do a little bit of talk about mixing the audio for a game called Archvale, which was made by Jamie, who sat there. So I'm going to talk about this tool that Jamie made for us to mix the game without middleware. So what do I mean by middleware? Games are made in game engines, usually, not always, but usually. And these are kind of big software packages that contain a lot of tools for making things. Similar to the way that like big music software packages, big video editing software packages, these exist. Game engines are kind of analogous to that, I guess. Middleware is something that goes in between that and the sound person that allows them to kind of replicate a lot of the functionality that you might have in a piece of audio software, so like making music play in sync with each other and this kind of thing without having to write code, and then just passing a piece of information that just says play this thing to the game engine for the programmer to deal with. Does that make sense? Cool, perfect. So that's an example of, we didn't have middleware on that game. We had to make our own tool, or we loosely. Jamie made me a tool. And then the next 2 examples are music. So Automatoys is a mobile game that's about getting a little ball into a little hole, a bit like Screwball Scramble, if anyone remembers that. And that was made in Fmod, which is a piece of middleware software, like what I just described, and Unity, which is a game engine. So I'll show a little bit of that. And then a slightly more complicated example of some music stuff that's made in Unreal Engine. So that's a different game engine, again, without any middleware. Okay, just gonna like fire through this, so please stop me at any point if you have a question. So this is quite similar to the way I've just kind of put here, that it kind of is similar to how Foley works in film and TV. So if you're making a bunch of footsteps for a film or for a TV show, you have to manually go through and kind of line them up with the feet, basically. So someone will perform that. Someone will literally just walk in time with the scene, and then someone else, me, whoever, will come along and manually line these things up afterwards. So this method, essentially what we're going to do is, what I did was go into the animation file of the character walking, place some markers that say, please play a footstep here, and then we use those to do a bunch of logic that tells it what kind of footstep to play. So it's quite similar to how you would do it. So the advantage for that is that if you only have one animation for walking, but you have a million different types of surfaces in the game, you only need to do this once. So you just do it once, and then it doesn't matter what the character walks on. You can give some logic that says, please play the right kind of footstep for this. The disadvantage is you have to do it manually. You have to manually scrub through and find the right place to put the footstep. So if someone changes the animation later on, everything breaks. Can be a problem. So here's an example of what that sounds like. This is from, I should say what this is actually from. This is from Meteor Project, which was a fan-made sort of remake of Final Fantasy IX. So a bunch of people, there was about 50 of us in the end, I think. We remade it over a couple of years, just the opening section of this game, which is from 1999. It's very good if you've never played it. And yeah, so it's sort of a fan project of like, what would this look like if it was made now? And I also completely forgot to turn the music off for this example, so you might actually not hear what I'm trying to describe. But essentially what we'll see is he's going to run around, and we get different footsteps depending on whether he's walking or whether he's running. We also get those footsteps change in volume depending on how close to the camera he is. So we have a thing called a listener, which is essentially the audio equivalent of the camera, if that makes sense. So if you think about, you've got this camera that's telling you where you're looking. You've also got this listener, which is telling you, where am I hearing from? So in this context, in this particular scene, the listener is attached to the camera, so we're hearing things from the perspective of the camera. But it can get quite complicated. You could put it, theoretically, in a 3D game, you might want to move it or put it in a lot of different places. You might want to put it on the character. You might want to put it elsewhere. In 2D games, it's more straightforward. But in this example, it's on the camera, so you'll see they get louder as he runs towards it, quieter as he runs away. You might hear them when he runs. Just about, yeah. Cool. So what's actually happening? So this is the animation file of what Vivi looks like while he's walking. Let's play that again because it was fun. So if anyone's used like a video editing software, this might look kind of familiar to you. Essentially, you've got your picture, what's happening here, and then you've got this timeline of, in this case, just some curves that are, I guess, telling him to move. I don't really know what's happening. And above that, we've got this thing that says notifies here. And we've got two little markers. So if I go to the next slide, you'll see there's a bit of a close-up of that. So essentially, all I've done here is I've gone through and gone, where are his feet actually hitting the ground? And then I've put in a marker that says footstep walk. So I should say as well, I had to do the same thing again for running, but it's exactly the same. It's boilerplate, kind of. You just copy the same thing over to the same sort of tech over to the next piece of animation. And here's the logic that's actually making it play. So I'll kind of try and talk through what's happening here. I appreciate that it's quite hard to see, and I'm like really happy to send slides to anyone if they want to look at this afterwards. So earlier on I said that the advantage of this system is that it's really flexible and modular. So right at the end here, these are saying play the sound at the location. In this case, the location is Vivi's foot, which is defined by this bit. I'll tell you how that works in a minute. So what the big advantage of this is we can just add more if we want to at any point. So elsewhere in the game engine, we have a list of all of the materials in the game, and we can define however many materials. I think it's up to 64, but maybe it's more. Maybe someone knows, I don't know. So we can have up to 64 different surfaces of footstep. So I think in that example, we've just got stone, but we could have grass, long grass, water, custard, whatever. Doesn't matter. So at any point, if someone adds a new surface, this system lets us add more, which is really helpful because we don't have to do all of the work again. So what's actually happening is, if you see, this is running from left to right. I should say that this is in Unreal Engine. This is Blueprints, for anyone who's not familiar with it. It's like a sort of visual scripting language. So each one of these little blobs does a thing, and then we can connect them together to make them do things in order. So in this case, we're saying, please find the player character and get his location. And then here we're saying, draw a line, and we're giving it some coordinates to draw that line from. So please start at the location of the player character and draw me a line that goes straight down. So this is just coordinates of x, which is left and right, y back and forwards, and z up and down. And we're just saying, draw it straight down, draw it z. So from Vivi all the way down until it intersects with the floor. And this is just, these are arbitrary numbers, so you kind of just have to tweak it until it hits the floor, and sometimes that requires some fiddling with. And then once that's done, we're saying, please switch depending on which surface and play these different sounds. So all of these are things like functionalities that are just built into Unreal Engine, and then we just make this little script, essentially, that hooks them all together. And then we make another one. So this one you can see says in the corner, I've just commented that it's the walk script. We have exactly the same one for the run, and it just plays back different sounds. And that's it. That's that example. OK, example number 2. Very different game. So this is Archvale, which is the game that Jamie made. And it is a sort of 2D adventure game about running around and killing weird creatures and collecting stones and rescuing the world, kind of, I guess. And here's an example of how it sounds. So previously I talked about the listener. In this case, it's really simple to know where to put it. It just goes straight on the camera because the player's sort of almost always in the middle of the screen, so we don't have to, I think that's right, that's what we do. We don't have to think about it too much. Those weird crows are actually me. And the slimes are some jelly that I hit in my studio and which is still in everything, in the side of my computer, in the grill of the microphone. Sometimes still I find bits of it on the wall. Cool. So hopefully you can hear, sounds okay. That's what the game sounded like when we were finished. And went out in the world sounding like this. So we had a completely different game engine that has much more straightforward audio functionality. GMS2, Game Maker Studio 2. I think they just call it Game Maker again now, right? Just call it Game Maker now. And I needed to be able to turn sounds up and down. So the inbuilt functionality for Game Maker only allows you to turn individual sound effects up and down one at a time. And now if you imagine for every sound effect, you've got a lot of variations so that it doesn't sound like the same thing triggering over and over again. So for example, for one footstep on one surface type, you might have 6 different samples for that are being played back. So that can get really fiddly really quickly. You could have thousands of things and you need to turn them all up and down individually. So essentially I asked Jamie, can you make me a tool that replicates some of the functionality of basically what a mixing desk might let you do. So on a mixing desk, if for example you were recording a drum kit, you might record all of the separate parts of your drum kit, and then you might send all of those to one channel, which allows you to turn the whole drum kit up and down as if it was one thing. So we're replicating that, essentially. So there's 2 parts to this. One that lets us turn all of the music or all of the sound up and down. So that is, I set a global volume for all of the sound effects in the game, or set a global volume for all of the music in the game. And I'll explain how we figured that out, how that works a little bit, as much as I understand it. And then the second one was to allow us to group sounds together. So similar to what I just described about grouping your drum kit together on a mixing desk, to group a bunch of sounds together and turn them up and down. So the way we did this was we had quite a strict naming convention for things. So anything that was music in the game must have had the prefix MUS. And anything that was a sound effect must have the prefix SFX. And then this script that Jamie made looks through those things and says, okay, this is music based on what its name is. When I say debug menu, I guess, is anyone familiar with the idea of like cheat codes in video games? Yeah, cool. So a lot of the time where they come from is tools for the game developers while they're making the game. It's really useful to be able to not die or to move through specific levels very quickly and that kind of thing. So most games will have some kind of debug tools while they're being built, and often these end up being cheat codes later on. So we had a debug menu that you can just hit enter while you're playing the game, type in a command, and it will do a thing, spawn an item or let you move levels or that kind of thing. So here's a little bit of, I don't know why I really included this slide, because it's not that interesting, sorry. Sorry, everyone. But basically, all that I'm trying to show here is all of this green stuff is doing nothing, and this little bit down here is saying, please turn all of the sound effects or all of the music to this number. So again, these numbers are just arbitrary numbers. They're like shoe size. They don't mean anything, really. Only that 0 is complete silence and 1 is as loud as we can go. So I had to just guess until it sounded right, unfortunately. But you can see, so in this case, we had all of the sound effects are at 0.55, all of the music 0.6, so slightly louder. So yeah, the functionality was very basic. That's a bit harsh, quite basic, but it worked really well. It worked well enough to like finish the game and get it sounding decent. So if you work in audio software, if you're an audio person, you might like to see things in what are called decibels, which is just a way of measuring loudness. Game Maker doesn't display decibels, and we didn't really have time to write a tool that would display things in decibels by default. So in order to get things loud enough, I had to measure separately while I was playing the game. So I would run the game, I would have a tool that's measuring how loud things are, and then I would play the game for an amount of time. Usually about an hour is a good average to get an average idea of how loud things are. So the loudest parts, what are the quietest parts, and what does that even out to over the course of an hour, and that gives you an idea of like how loud your game is. This is also a process that people will do with film and TV, and there are quite strict standards in TV for this, so you have to meet certain loudness standards or the BBC make you pay them loads of money. But in games, that's not really the case, so it's more about you just want it to be sounding similar level to other people's games. Ironically, none of my videos in this slideshow are a similar level to each other, so I guess I forgot about that bit for this. But yeah, the key thing that this tool let me do, which was really, really helpful, is to make changes to the volume of things while we're playing the game. So I can be playing the game and go, that thing's too loud, I'm going to turn it down a little bit, and then continue to play, and I don't have to shut everything, turn the thing down, and then start the game again, which once the game is almost done can take a really long time. Like, you have to rebuild everything when you open the game. So that was really useful, and again, that functionality is not built into this game engine by default, so it was helpful. So this is how the tool works. You press enter, you open the thing, you access the tool by writing mix tool, and then you set the volume of a single sound by typing the name of the sound and then the number that you want the volume to be. Or you can set the volume of groups of things by typing the start of the name of the sound and then a star figure, which is like a wildcard. So essentially you're saying anything that starts with this prefix, turn anything that starts with that prefix to this volume. So in this case, it would be any sound that is a footstep, please turn it to 0.1. And I'll show an example of this now. And then all of these changes happen, and then the global multiplier that I showed at the start, where we turn everything up and down, that happens afterwards. So again, like the final faders on a mixing desk, we turn everything up and down, and then we hear it. So here's a little example of that happening. You'll see it, tiny script over here. It says mix tool. Music, please turn all the music off. 0. And then we'll turn it back on. So the size of the group is like definable by how much you type in, which is really useful. You can turn everything down, or you can get more and more granular about how much you're turning down. So in this case, I was like, I just want to turn all the footsteps off. You can hear now there's no footsteps. And hopefully you'll hear if we turn them back on. And there they are. Cool. Wow, I'm really flying through this. Sorry, everyone. Please ask me questions at the end if you want. Okay, cool. Example number 3. Try and do this one a bit more slowly. So these next 2 examples are music, and I'll explain a little bit of what I mean by dynamic music first before I go through this. So the idea of dynamic music is music that's reacting to what's happening in the game. So it could be reacting to what the player's doing, or it could be not. It could just be reacting to other things that are happening in the game. And that can go from really simple. So like a really simple example might be you're running around in an adventure game, the music is very ambient, you bump into a bad guy, and suddenly big drums come in, but the music doesn't stop, right? It continues, but these drums fade in, and that would be an example of some dynamic music. It can be that simple up to like everything is being triggered by things that are happening in the game. So there are games that all of the music is being triggered at runtime by just sort of code that is happening in the game that is telling it to play this based on things that are happening in the game. I've never done that, it's really hard. And there are sort of 2 broad ways of doing this that people refer to as like horizontal or vertical. And all that people tend to mean by that is if it's horizontal, you're going along a piece, and then when you tell it to transition, you move to another piece and you carry on along it. If it's vertical, you continue to go along the same piece, but you fade in another layer or fade out another layer. In practice, a lot of games will do both of these things, and you'll see in the last example that we're kind of doing both. But in this example, very much horizontal, so it's every level, there's 12 levels in the game, every level has its own music, and we just transition based on what level we're in. So yeah, each level has its own track. The important thing with this game was that levels, you can switch between any level to any level at any point very quickly. So you can go in and out of a level and just switch. And you'll see, I'll show you an example in a minute. You'll see what that looks like. So we needed to be able to go from any piece of music to any other piece of music, and it needed to transition really quickly, so on the next beat. So they all needed to be in sync. They needed to move quickly. When you're in the menu, so you'll see that like the game, you zoom out and you can see all the levels, and then you zoom in and you're in one level. So we wanted the music to reflect that a bit, so we just filter the music so it sounds a little bit more muffled and quiet when we're zoomed out, and then it sounds kind of as it should when we're zoomed in. And so this is in the tool called fmod, which is one of the middleware tools that exist. There are lots of them, or a few of them. And again, it's quite simple, but it works quite well. So here's an example of what that, how that functions in the game. So you can hear it's quite muffled while we're in the menu. This is an old build of the game. There should not be a big grey line there. I don't know why that's there. And then once we go into a level, the music fades in properly. So I wasn't super happy with the transitions in the menu. So in the final version of the game, we actually played a little kind of radio changing channel sort of static noise over the transition to just kind of hide it a bit, basically, and make it sound a bit more like, I don't know, like we wanted it to sound, I guess. And here's what's happening behind the scenes. This is very weird looking. So I'll explain a little bit before I play, and then I'll play, and then I'll show some like detailed close-up of what's happening. So essentially what we've got here is each one of these little blue segments is one level, so one track. And I've put them all on just one huge timeline. So it will just play, and then when I tell it to move, it will move to a different one. The reason for doing that is, again, the same thing with the footsteps. This is modular, so if I need to add more levels at a later date, I can add more levels. That's the advantage. The disadvantage is this is quite an enormous file to store in memory, so if we had lots and lots and lots of sounds in this game, this could become a problem. In this case, we didn't, so it was fine. But it also caused an extremely janky bug, where in one of the levels, if you switched in and out of the level really quickly, it would throw the playhead of this timeline all the way up here, so it would just be playing nothing, and that would completely break the game. We didn't know that until we put the game out, and we had to fix it very quickly, and we fixed it by just putting an enormous loop here that says, please send the playhead back this way, which is a really janky way of fixing it, but it worked. So here's what it sounds like in the engine. So you can hear we just switched off the filter. So these little numbers at the top, they are, the one on the right is, are we filtered or not? The one on the left is, what level are we on? And so we're passing information from this software to the game engine. So the game engine is determining what level we're on, and it's passing that information to here, where it changes this number, and that moves what track we're playing. It's like sort of, I hesitate to use the word sophistication because it's not that sophisticated, but like a level of sophistication you can't really get without middleware unless you've got someone dedicated who is programming the audio full time, or you've got someone really nice like Jamie who will make you nice tools. And I couldn't do this on my own because I'm not a programmer, I'm quite bad at programming. So here's a close-up of that top bit, and this is like all of the information that is telling the thing where to go, essentially. So you can see from the top down, we've got these markers that are saying level 1, level 2, level 3. That's literally just for me to go, what level is this? And then we've got all of these things that look the same. These are called transition conditions, so we're telling it where to go and when to go there. So, and you can see on every single one, there is one of these for every other level. So level 1 has every level except for level 1. Level 2 has, you can't really see it, but has every level except for level 2, and so on and so on and so on. And then here, we are telling, with each of these, each of the track is a slightly different speed. So we're just telling it what's the speed and how many beats are in a bar. In this case, that's not that relevant because all of them have the same time signature. So time signatures in music are how we define how many beats are in a bar. So that is, you know, actually, I don't know how to explain time signatures. How many beats are in a bar? In this case, it's 4. And here's a close-up of something you couldn't see. I don't think you can see it in this. No, you can't really see it, but you would see it in this tray down the bottom if you clicked on any one of these green things. And that is essentially telling these little green things, how should you behave? And the important thing is here is that we're saying only go to level 1 with this little green bit here. And you can see we've set the destination to level 1. We're telling it what size are the notes. So these are different lengths of note. And we're telling it what length of note to transition on. So in this case, it's 1 beat. and we're telling it to do it relative to the previous position. So if I go back to this slide and play it from here, maybe this won't work, we'll see. It won't work. You can see when it moves that it doesn't move back to the start of the next track, it moves roughly to the same position. It took me a while to figure out how to do that. It's actually really easy, I just didn't know how to do it. So if we didn't set that to relative, it would go back to the start every time you change it, and that doesn't sound as good. Okay, that was example 3. This is so much faster than I imagined it was going to be, so please ask me questions. So, example 4, a slightly more complicated system for playing back music. So in this one, we're kind of doing a bit of both, a bit of the horizontal, moving from left to right, and a little bit of vertical as well. So this is for a game called Blade Song. Blade Song is a game about making swords in like quite intense detail. So we wanted the music system to react to like how finished your sword is. And it took us a while to figure out how reactive to that it should be. Like it would have been, it could have gone really wrong if we tried to make it too reactive to that, because every time you add something, it starts to do something else, and it just kind of sounds a bit messy and weird. So we went for something quite subtle in the end, where we just have 3 phases of music, and we determine when to change between them based on roughly how done you are. So when you first start, you just have, I think it's called a billet, like a little piece of steel that you can move around. And that's phase 1. When you've done a little bit of manipulating it, maybe you've given it a point and you've turned it into a blade, then you move to phase 2. And when your sword is almost done, it's polished, it's got like all the bits that swords have, then we move to phase 3. So again, it's quite simple, it's quite straightforward, but hopefully it gives the player like a feeling of they're progressing. And it's quite subtle, so I didn't really want them to notice that. I just want you to be playing the game and feel like, oh, the music's doing something new now. Cool, okay, I'm doing something new, the music's doing something new. So here's the music as it was written in software that I was writing it in, and this is super quiet, this example, sorry, Dan. That you can't really see, but we've got, this is a horrible mess, sorry everyone. We've got like one phase that is quite boring, not a lot happening, pretty basic. This is our phase 1. This is our phase 2, so we get slightly more involved percussion, we get this cello melody that's happening, but still quite subtle. There's a little bit of kind of like, there's sort of some like forging sounds in the music as well, just like general fire type sounds. And I think I tried to transition really smoothly and failed at this point to phase 3, so you'll see how that sounds. But hopefully you'll hear it in the game. Yeah, there you go. And so this is our phase 3 music. We've got more intense percussion and the same melody, but played higher up. And sort of doubled by some instruments, but you can't hear that well in this example. So the reason to keep the first phase, sorry, stop shouting at you all. The reason to keep the first phase so sparse is because when you load, we realized that when you load into the game, you can load swords that you've already made, and if you load one that's basically done, the music wants to immediately transition to the third phase. If the first phase is super involved, and then as soon as you load it, it immediately transitions, it becomes really obvious that that's what's happening, and it kind of breaks your immersion. So we just went with something that's basically just percussion, so that if you load into a game where the sword is almost done, and we need to transition into the third phase straight away, that happens and you don't really notice, hopefully, or you don't notice too much. So here's what that sounds like in the game. I'll point out when the transition is happening, because hopefully they should be quite subtle. Or maybe you'll notice, I don't know. Apologies for my bad sword as well. I'm not very good at this game that I'm working on. There's like a running theme that I'm quite bad at all of the games that I've worked on. So you can hear we're still in phase 1. And then we've transitioned into phase 2. Hopefully that was quite subtle and you didn't really notice. So we went through quite a lot of iterations of this music system to get it to not sound super broken and weird. It took a really long time. And so now I'm going to add a bunch of parts to my sword, a hilt and a handle and all these kinds of things. And eventually you'll hear we'll move to phase 3 of the music. It's around here somewhere. There we go. It was quite a subtle transition, hopefully, but now we're in phase 3. You can hear the melody is the same, but played higher up. Not sure what I was doing there. I think I was trying to remember how to play the game at the end there. Okay, so this is, again, same as last time. Here's what's happening behind the scenes. I'm going to try and talk through some of this stuff, and some of it I'm definitely going to get wrong what it does. So anyone who knows blueprints, please put your hand up afterwards and be like, that's not what that does, actually. So here we've got these two parts are telling us this is phase 1 of the music, this is phase 2 and 3 of the music together, and I'll explain a bit about why we chose to do it like that in a minute. And all of these conditions here are saying, trigger this phase to the other phase depending on various things that are happening in the game. The reason they've all got little clocks by them is that we don't want to do it immediately, so we want to say, please be ready to do this, but don't do it straight away. Otherwise, you have the issue where when you actually want that to happen, it has to load it into the thing into memory, and then it freaks out, doesn't like it. It's my understanding of what those things are doing anyway. I'll explain a little bit more as I move around. So this is the same thing, music playing back in the same way. And as we move around, I'll kind of point out other little bits as well. So here we've just got some logic that is saying, is it true that we're in this phase? If it's true, please do this. So in this case, this is 3 of the same thing, but for different phases, essentially saying, if it's true that X is happening, please send us back to phase 1. If it's true that Y is happening, please send us to phase 3, and so on. This is a little bit more of a complicated example than the footsteps example, because this is, if this is the right use of the word recursive, it's kind of recursive in that inside this, there's more logic happening. So all of these little things here that are just kind of a single little sort of weird little capsule thing, we're taking some information from elsewhere within the game and using that to feed into this, to give it something to do. And on the left-hand side here, we've got this number, which is just 1, 2, or 3. Which phase are we in? I guess I should explain at this point how we decided which phase you should be in as well. It's quite arbitrary, but it's just based on the number of, so you saw when we played the game, you have all these kind of, is it just going to loop? Yes, don't loop. You have all these kind of abilities that you can apply to the sword down one side, so things like drawing the sword out, flattening it, giving it a point, and then later on you have a bunch of different parts you can add. So it's just the sum of those things. It's very simple. So it's just like, once you have 25 in total things, please move to phase 2. Once you have, I don't know, 50 in total. I'm not sure what the actual numbers are, but that's how it works. Okay, so this is like one final confusing example, and then we're done. So inside this one that says music forging phase 2 and 3, you probably can't see that from here, but that's what it says. There's more stuff. So inside that, what's happening is we have phase 2 of the music here being played by this, phase 3 of the music here being played by this, and we're telling it how to fade in and what tempo the music is, so what speed it is, so that everything stays in sync. So inside the phase 1 one, we've got a much simpler version of this, where we just have one of these that tells it how to fade in and out, how long to fade in and out over, and one of these that at the top, I can't reach, that tells you what the tempo of the music is. This one is more complicated because we're essentially playing both phase 2 and 3 at the same time and then fading between them, so we get like a nice smooth transition. With the first phase, there's no real melody, so it doesn't matter. We can just jump from one to the other. With this one, I appreciate this is like a bit dense towards the end of the day, and it's really hot. Sorry, everyone. Please ask me questions afterwards, and I'll try and explain. But yeah, with this one, we want to be able to always be in time, have these two always be in time with each other and just transition smoothly. And you'll see that when we turn this kind of big knob thing here that's in the middle, it just moves between the two. So again, the advantage of this is it keeps things in time, it's nice and easy. The disadvantage is slightly more costly in terms of memory, just because we have two things instead of one playing all of the time. That might not be true, programmers correctly. I think that's true. So you can hear we have phase 2, and we could actually have both playing at the same time, half volume if we wanted to, with the knob in the middle. We don't ever do that in the game. We just make it move quickly, but we could, in theory. The other advantage, I guess, is that if we decide later on to swap out the music for example, we're going to record a cellist at some point, rather than this sort of synthetic cello that we've used, it's very easy for me to swap what's happening here without affecting any of the logic. Okay, that's it, I'm done. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you very much. Bang on time.
Cool, okay.
Anybody got any questions? I think we got one online.
No.
So I've got a multi-tiered question from Ben.
Okay.
The first part of the question is, generally, are you writing all the music for these games as well as doing the sound? And the follow-up question would be whether it's common for composers to do sound design in games and vice versa. And if not, where are sound designers like you finding music?
Okay, big questions. The first question, I am on some of these games. So on Archvale, I didn't write any of the music. I just did the sound design. On Bladesong, I'm doing both. On Automatoes, I'm doing both. And on the first example, which was kind of a fun hobby project, I didn't write the music. That was actually just an arrangement done by somebody else. The second question was, so that was two parts as well, right? So is it common for sound designers to do both?
The second part of the question was, is it common for composers to do sound design in games and vice versa? And if not, where are sound designers like you finding music?
Okay, so I'm going to answer the second bit first. So in general, it wouldn't be my job really to find music if I'm not writing music. It might be, usually if I'm not doing the music, it would be that on the sort of scale of project that I work on, which is mostly quite small independent games, it would either be that they already have someone, or that they don't need me to do it, basically, for whatever reason. So either way, it kind of wouldn't be my responsibility generally. The first question, yeah, it's relatively common, I think. My sort of background was in sound design, so I first started doing that, and then I gradually started to do more music again. But it depends on the scale of game as well. For smaller independent games where people's budgets are smaller, or where they just want to keep the team size a bit smaller, it's pretty common. For big budget, kind of what are called AAA games, so like GTA and Call of Duty and that kind of thing, no, really not common. Like those two sides of the project will speak to each other, but they will never be the same, almost never be the same person. And the sound designer wouldn't be one person like me, like it often is. Sometimes it's not one person, sometimes it's me and a few other people. But that could be a team of 5 to 20, depending on the scale of the game. And there will be an audio director whose job it is to find the composer and that kind of thing, I think.
Hey, so question about the kind of your mixing approach. So I might have missed this at the beginning, but do you kind of mix everything down so it sounds good within your DAW, and then bounce everything out as like normalized stems and then work from there within the game engine? Or do you bounce everything out so it's all sounds good to each other and then tweak it in the game? Or is it, how do you kind of bridge that kind of, like, there's the kind of two phases of mixing, I suppose?
I would love to say that I have like a super diligent approach to this, but I definitely don't. So just to clarify for anyone that doesn't know, DAW is like a digital audio workstation, so essentially a mixing desk studio, recording studio in your computer. And when you say normalize, you mean like raised to a specific volume, right, before it comes out of the... Is that a good way of describing normalize?
You make the everything as loud as it... Basically, everything is as loud as it can be. It all comes out as like peak volume. So you could have like what would be a really quiet footstep sound in your mix. But then when you bounce that out as a single stem and it gets normalized, then it's as loud as the loudest explosion, for instance.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't do that. No, I wouldn't normalize things to be, and I think it's not common to normalize things for kind of the reason that you sort of just almost hinted at there, which is that like a footstep should not be as loud as an explosion, so they don't need to be. You're just making more work for yourself. But I would say that generally, yes, I would export things from the DAW as loud as possible, like as loud as I can get them within reason, because turning things down in the engine is always better than turning things up. If you start having to turn everything up, then you're kind of just chasing your own tail, because you're bringing all of the noise that's in those sounds up as well, which is a huge problem, can be a huge problem. And you might run out of up, like you might run out of up to go, and then you have to bring things, you have to re-import things. Some people who I know who are more kind of working in as part of a big team, a big company, they'll have standards, so they'll have all ambient sounds are at this level, all footsteps are at this level, all explosions are at this level, and that makes their mix a lot easier. But when they're mixing a game, that could be like a month or two long process, whereas if I'm working on something like this, I'm kind of doing it as I go, and I might have a couple of weeks to refine it at the end if I'm lucky.
Right. So yeah, you're kind of starting off with like, here's a really, really nice mix in my DAW, and then I'm taking that out with all of the levels, like variable, relational levels, all exact, and then you take it over and then you go, cool, probably a couple of little tweaks here and there, rather than having to go, right, everything's as loud and now I need to bring everything kind of down. Right?
Ideally, gotcha. Ideally. It can really depend on the game engine and the tools as well. Like with something like Game Maker, it's much more simple because it's just playing back what you give it, essentially. Whereas an engine like Unreal, there's a whole bunch of behind-the-scenes stuff that it's going through before it gets to the person who's hearing it, and you can lose a lot of volume through that. So you have to kind of, you can tweak a bunch of settings to make that not the case. But yeah, it can get more complicated the more complicated the engine is, basically.
Sure.
Yeah.
All right, thanks.
Cool.
That was really clear and interesting. Thank you.
Good, thanks.
Great. I have two questions, and neither of them are particularly technical.
Cool.
The first one was you said about like the slime and how you were using the jelly,
yeah.
and I wondered what like your favorite or most creative thing you'd used as a sound was.
God, I don't know. I do use my own voice quite a lot, so I think that's probably the most fun thing for my neighbours. It's just me screaming into a microphone. What's the most creative? Yeah, I don't know. I think things that are really big can often be made from things that are really small. So like I got a bunch of recordings of, I think actually they weren't in there, but there's some lifts in Archvale that move that are like these big metal platforms, and they sound quite chunky. And I think it was like a little fishing reel or something, just like slowed down, really, really pitched down. So yeah, stuff like that, like stretching things out really long until they're kind of unrecognizable. Yeah, it's fun.
That's really cool, thank you. My second question was if Blade Song is out yet, and if so, where can I get it? Because it looks amazing.
It's not out yet. It will be out sometime in the future. We're about to sign a publishing deal, so it's that's, I'm probably not supposed to say that. It's going to happen, so it's fine. Said it now, sorry, David. Yeah, so but we run quite regular playtests. So yeah, find it on Steam, you'll find the Discord server, and then you can join. And
cool.
I think we've done like 3 playtests so far, so yeah.
Yeah, I tried to be one of the first customers. It looks so cool.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Hello there.
Hi.
So in the 1990s, we had game consoles like a Mega Drive and Nintendo, and they used the basic of sounds to start off with within their musical enterprise. But they were so creative and inventive with getting their sounds to key match. Games like Silent Hill and other things, the directors of the time used the basic steps. Would these be sort of like inspiration from the 90s on how it makes you what you are now?
Yeah, I suppose. I mean, so the like skill level involved in like making sound for games on old kind of 8-bit consoles is so high. Like they had to be, a lot of those people were very good programmers as well, because they would have to, they couldn't hear their music until they'd kind of written all the codes to make it play back. So like, I guess the really like popular example with other sound designers would be like Donkey Kong Country. The soundtrack to that is really kind of wild, that he made something that sounds that ambient out of like a sound chip that sounds very computery naturally. Like, so yeah, definitely. But I think we have a lot less limitations now in terms of sort of when the PlayStation and sort of consoles that use CDs came along, that allows you to just stream audio files, which you couldn't do before that. And that just makes things a lot easier, because then you can just kind of do what I've done here and write some music and then put it in the game, as opposed to having to kind of, it's almost embedded in the game. It is part of the game. Yeah.
Hiya.
Hi.
I was wondering kind of which aspects of making sound design and music for games or sort of interactive experiences you find particularly interesting, or the kind of challenges you enjoy solving the most?
That's a good question. So there's two answers to that. One is that like there's a bunch of things I didn't like about working on TV shows that I don't have to do in games, like manually lining things up generally, which is quite boring. So that kind of attracted me to it, maybe a bit naively in hindsight, because there's other things. I guess the main thing that I like about it is that I don't, as is probably evident from this talk, I don't really know what I'm doing a lot of the time, and I kind of figure it out as I'm going along, and I'm lucky to like work with nice people who are willing to accommodate that. So like, yeah, the kind of, you're sort of required to be a bit curious, I think, which is nice, yeah.
Awesome.
One more from online.
Question from Cal. For someone who's trying to get into technical sound design for games, would you recommend learning an audio middleware first or a video game engine first? For example, I've been told to learn Unreal Engine and WWise, but I don't really know where to start.
I would recommend take everything I say with a pinch of salt, person who's trying to get into technical game audio, because I'm not that technical. Despite that talk, this is like, everything's a bit janky in here, so yeah. But the short sort of answer to that, I think, is that you can't really learn one without the other. Like, you need, WWise needs to speak to an engine in order for things to play back. So pick one of each, pick one big game engine, either Unity or Unreal, pick one big middleware, either Fmod or Wise, and start with that. It doesn't really matter which one, I don't think, but it will sort of inform the kind of work you get. So I think if you want to work on more indie stuff, Fmod and Unity is probably the easiest way to go. This maybe is changing now because of the way licenses are changing and stuff, so now you can get WWise for free, which you couldn't get before. But if you want to work out on AAA, big budget games, as part of a sound team, you must learn Wise. There's no way you'll get a job without learning it, and I'm rubbish at it, so I'm not the person to ask about that. But yeah, hopefully that's helpful.
Hi, yeah,
Hi.
Really good talk.
Thanks.
Thanks very much. I just wondered, so footsteps, they must be sort of super common across games. And say you have like a really cool footstep. Can you use that in other games, or is it like, can you copyright footsteps? How do you?
It's quite an interesting question. Yeah. So the way that copyright works for sound is quite complicated, and I'm not a lawyer, disclaimer, obviously. But so a lot of the sounds that I'm making, I do some recording of my own, or like I said, I use my own voice and stuff. But it will be layered up with things that are from libraries that I own. All sound designers will be buying things from libraries. And you don't own the copyright to that library. You're licensing it from somebody else. So you can't give that copyright away. And sometimes this can be a difficult thing to explain to people in contracts because they're used to working with an artist where the artist makes the art, you buy the art, belongs to you. It's not that straightforward with sound. Music's a bit more complicated, a bit different. But so the short answer is it depends. It depends on what you've agreed with the person that you're working for. If you've agreed, I can use these sounds in whatever I like, then yeah, sure. If you've agreed, so like, for example, on the game that me and Jamie are working on, he has an exclusive license to my sound, so I can't use that specific footstep in something else now. But generally, a footstep is like, I know you used it as an example, but like a footstep is a footstep. They are quite ubiquitous, whereas like a big sort of sound that is like really designed, it's probably more interesting and fun, but also way less applicable to other stuff as well. Like if you design a huge explosion for something, it's probably quite specific to that thing in that game, so it might not actually be that useful elsewhere anyway. So not really is the short answer, I think. Cool.
Last questions?
Okay. Hello.
Hi.
I'm a music producer and sound designer. So I'm just wondering from you, is what DAW, digital audio workstation, do you work in? And what musical instruments and plugins do you use?
Oh my gosh. So Reaper is the answer to what digital audio workstation I use. Or Pro Tools if I'm obliged, but I'd prefer not to. I play the guitar. It's my first instrument, but not very well anymore because I don't really practice anymore. And I sort of badly play the piano. And then plugins, like loads, too many to name. But probably the free plugin that I like the most is Valhalla Frequency Echo. So if you don't have it, you should go get it because it's free. That's my top plugin tip. Yeah. We can talk more about plugins if you want to, though, because I'd like to hear what you use too.
Any last questions? All right then.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you to Jake.
Thanks.
All right. So before you all go, if you do want to stick around and hot desk today or find out more about what we do, please come find one of the studio team, which I think is just me and Lautim today. We'll be happy to help. Everyone's on holiday. If you're watching online, drop us a line on studio@watershed.co.uk with any questions. Thank you all for being here today, and we'll see you again next time for the last talk of the summer.